I'll tell you the truth. The most peaceful place I've ever lived is the one where 3 state patrol boats tried to arrest me at 6 a.m. like I was Pablo Escobar but floating, with a cordless drill. And the funniest part, if Evelyn Vance hadn't obsessed over my little houseboat like it was a personal insult from God, I never would have discovered she'd been quietly bleeding our whole neighborhood dry. So yeah, in a deeply twisted way, I kind of owe that woman a thank you card right after the judge stamps denied on her entire existence. It was a Tuesday morning in Georgia, the kind where the fog hangs low over Lake Laner like the water's still half asleep, where everything's quiet except the occasional heron, calling out like it's got a complaint to file. I'm standing on my deck in bare feet, coffee in one hand, looking out at this misty glass surface, and then boom, blue lights start punching through the fog like a nightclub opened in the middle of a nature documentary. 3 Department of Natural Resources patrol boats come slicing in, engines rumbling, and they fan out around my houseboat in this neat little formation, like I'm about to be boarded by SEAL Team 6. And through the haze, because of course, there she is, Evelyn Vance, standing on her giant mahogany dock like she's posing for a magazine called Entitled Monthly. Head to toe in crisp tennis whites, perfect ponytail, expensive sunglasses at 6 in the morning for no reason other than performance, pointing at me like I'm a threat to national security. She's holding a police-grade bullhorn on a lake at sunrise, and she's screaming, "That floating garbage barge is destroying the property values of Emerald Cove Estates." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Well, it was funny, but because the audacity was so pure it felt unreal. This is the same woman who'd spent the last 3 years terrorizing grown adults over the shade of their mailbox posts, and whether their lawn gnomes were seasonally appropriate. Like she was the Pope of suburban aesthetics, and we were all living in her little holy land of beige. And the part she didn't know, the part that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it, while she was out here acting like she was protecting the community, she was quietly skimming money from it. Not a little. Not oops, accounting error. I'm talking $127,000. Working families, retirees, people on fixed incomes. She was siphoning off their dues to fund her own lifestyle, and using fear and rules to keep everybody too exhausted to look closely. But I'm getting ahead of myself because you're probably wondering why a 44-year-old man is living on a houseboat he built with his own hands, and why a woman dressed like a country club assassin is trying to get him dragged off it by the state. My name's Elias Thorne, and 8 months before the morning of the patrol boats, my entire life got ripped apart like someone grabbed the tablecloth and yanked. 20 years married, gone. Not the clean. We grew apart, we wish each other well kind of divorce either. This was scorched earth. The kind where lawyers argue over the dog like it's a stock portfolio, where the house becomes a battlefield, where you wake up one day and realize the future you thought you had was a story you made up and now you're standing in the wreckage of it, holding papers that say half of what you built isn't yours anymore. I lost the home, I lost savings, I lost this dumb belief that stability is something you can buy if you work hard enough. And when it was all final, when the ink dried and the dust settled, I was basically homeless. Not sleeping under a bridge homeless, but the kind where you've got a decent job and a decent brain, and still you're sitting there like, so where exactly am I supposed to go now? That's when my grandfather's cabin came back into my life like a lifeline wrapped in barbed wire. He'd left me this old A-frame tucked into the woods along Lake Laner, a place I hadn't touched in years because I was too busy grinding through corporate life and trying to save a marriage that was already dead. When I drove out there after the divorce, the cabin looked like it had been holding its breath for a decade. Sagging foundation, water damage, roof that might as well have been a suggestion, wiring that screamed fire hazard just by existing. But it was mine. It was quiet. It didn't ask me to pretend. And for a man who'd just watched his whole life get chopped in half, it felt like salvation. Except I couldn't live in it yet. It needed a full gut renovation before it was even safe to sleep in. 6 months minimum, if I didn't want to wake up in the middle of the night with the roof on my chest. So I stood out there on that old dock, listening to the water lap against rotten wood, and I thought, all right, I need a temporary home. Now my day job, my actual job, was cybersecurity. I design systems, I hunt for patterns, I build walls you don't see until you smash your face into them. But what kept me sane all those years was working with my hands, restoring vintage motorcycles, building hardwood furniture, fixing what other people throw away. That kind of work, it's honest. It doesn't gaslight you. If you mess up, the wood tells you immediately. So the houseboat happened the way a lot of desperate plans happen, Half necessity, half therapy, and a tiny bit of screw it. What's the worst that could happen? I built it like a man possessed. Measuring, cutting, sealing bulkheads, laying marine-grade wiring, fitting everything tight. Cedar sawdust everywhere, coffee on a camp stove every morning, radio low in the background. I'd work until my hands cramped, then I'd sit on that deck at night and listen to the lake breathe. And I'm telling you, waking up to herons gliding over still water, hearing the soft slap of ripples against the hull, it wiped out the memory of freeway horns and kitchen arguments in a way I didn't even know was possible. Emerald Cove Estates wraps around a deep inlet on the lake. About 200 properties, a mix of old locals who've been fishing there since the 70s, weekend families with neon wakeboards, and lately a wave of hyper-wealthy retirees who moved in and immediately started trying to turn the wilderness into a gated suburb with rules for how you're allowed to exist. Most people got along, until you ran into the Emerald Cove Property Owners Association, the HOA, a little empire that controlled the best stretch of shoreline like it was a private kingdom. And sitting on the throne of that kingdom was Evelyn Vance. Picture someone who used to work compliance at a hedge fund, because she did, and brought that whole vibe with her. Blonde hair sprayed into defiance against humidity, a permanent smile that never reached her eyes, and a talent for turning bylaws into weapons. She lived in this modern glass and steel mansion with her husband Arthur, a man with the personality of wet paper towel. I don't say that to be mean, I say it because he'd stand behind her like a decorative houseplant while she torched people's lives. In 3 years, she'd find the Alvarez family for their kids' inflatable water toys, called them visual pollution. She'd threatened old Hank Gallagher, 80 years old, retired structural engineer, because his wildflower garden violated her turf grass height regulations. She had this way of making you feel like you were always one mistake away from punishment, like the lake wasn't a place to live, it was a place to audition for her approval. My first week on the water, before the solar panels were even fully rigged, she showed up on my grandfather's dock with a clipboard like it was a weapon. Tight smile, sweet voice with poison underneath. She tells me my DIY raft project is an unacceptable deviation from community standards and an affront to the neighborhood's prestige. I'm standing there with sawdust on my jeans, trying to keep it polite, and I tell her, calmly, that my family's deed predates her association by decades, that the water itself is state property, and that my vessel meets every maritime safety code on the books. Her smile didn't fade, it hardened, and she leaned in and hissed, "We'll just have to see about that." From that moment, it was war, just the kind where the bullets are paperwork and the explosions are stress headaches. She'd file noise complaints about my generator, even though my setup ran on silent lithium batteries and solar. I'd catch her in the brush with a telephoto lens taking pictures of my deck like she was documenting Bigfoot. Anonymous reports started hitting the county. Raw sewage dumping, drunken navigation, illegal anchoring. Stuff so specific it sounded like it was written by a lawyer who'd never stepped on a boat. Then she escalated to the morning of the raid. 3 patrol boats. Blue lights. Bullhorn. Her sitting back, smug as a cat watching a mouse get trapped. Officer Hayes boarded first, a veteran Marine deputy, sharp, no nonsense. I could tell he expected to find a floating meth lab or a death trap held together by hope and duct tape. I didn't argue. I didn't panic. I handed him a binder, schematics, inspections, receipts, everything, and I said, "Tear it apart." He did. And I watched his whole posture change as he walked through my systems, commercial-grade marine wiring, redundant bilge pumps, Coast Guard certified fire suppression, weight distribution balanced like I'd built it for NASA. 20 minutes later, Hayes shook my hand and said, loud enough for the fog to carry, "This is the finest, most over-engineered private houseboat I've seen in 20 years. Across the water, Evelyn looked like she might combust. She started sputtering about precedent and property values, and Hayes treated her like a toddler having a tantrum in a grocery store. But the moment that really shifted everything happened right before he left. Hayes pulled me aside and said low, "Look, we've been getting hammered with reports about you. Different names, same phrasing, same legal terminology. It's not random." That's when it clicked. This wasn't just a bored retiree with too much time. This was a calculated harassment campaign, documented, systematic. And I'm a cybersecurity architect. My whole life is patterns. The second I smelled that kind of coordination, my brain flipped from defense to offense. I started building a database. Encrypted, time-stamped, obsessive. Every complaint, every fine, every interaction. I learned about selective enforcement, this beautiful legal concept where if an association punishes one resident while ignoring identical violations by their favorites, they can lose the right to enforce the rule at all. And once people heard I'd stood my ground, and when they started showing up, my houseboat turned into a floating confessional. Neighbors paddling over at dusk like they were meeting a resistance cell. Mrs. Lynn, retired nurse, fined for launching her quiet electric fishing skiff at dawn. The Alvarez family, tearful, explaining how Evelyn got the fire marshal to shut down their daughter's quinceañera over unauthorized parking hazards. Hank Gallagher, hands shaking, holding letters threatening liens. Then Evelyn called an emergency town hall at the clubhouse, packed room, low ceiling, that stale smell of old carpet and political drama. She stands up with slick bar graphs on a projector like she's giving a quarterly earnings report, warning that my floating trailer would invite criminals, bring down equity, open the floodgates to shanty towns. The room was humming with fear, and that's when I stood up in the back, kept my voice steady, and asked one simple question. Why is my legal, state-inspected vessel a crisis, but her buddy's massive 2-story party barge, the one that violated setback lines by 20 feet, has never gotten a single citation? You could feel the air change, like someone turned off the fan. Silence hit that room so hard it felt physical. Evelyn's jaw dropped, and for the first time people saw it. She wasn't enforcing standards, she was enforcing power. Her emergency vote to ban my boat failed. Public humiliation, right there under fluorescent lights. So she went nuclear. She hired some downtown Atlanta law firm that charged $1,000 an hour to send me cease and desist letters full of jargon and threats, demanding I vacate the water in 30 days. I read one on my deck with a bourbon in my hand and laughed out loud, because threatening a man who just survived a brutal divorce is like threatening to drown a fish. I'd already been in legal hellfire, and I wasn't afraid of another match. Here's the twist. Her own lawyers handed me the rope she'd hang herself with. In their frenzy to find a loophole to sink my boat, they ordered a comprehensive satellite and physical survey of the entire inlet, thinking they'd prove I was violating something. What they accidentally generated was a legally binding document showing Evelyn's pristine mahogany dock was illegally built on protected state wetlands. She'd spent years calling everyone else non-compliant, and her dock was literally on the demolition list. That alone would have been delicious karma, but it was only the opening act. Board elections came next, and the community was done. People who'd been quiet for years showed up angry, tired, and ready. I ran, not because I wanted power, but because I wanted this whole poison system to stop. I won in a landslide, 80%, and Evelyn had to sit there in the front row with her pearls clutched like they were life support while the room applauded. My first move as president, before the cheers even died, was a forensic audit. I hired Clara Higgins, a forensic auditor, so sharp it felt like she could smell fraud through drywall. She'd helped me once untangle hidden assets in my divorce, and I figured we'd find some sloppy expenses, maybe inflated landscaping bills. What Clara found over 3 weeks wasn't mismanagement, it was a criminal enterprise. Fabricated invoices for lake bed beautification, tens of thousands paid to companies that didn't exist. Monthly retainers for administrative compliance consulting routed to a shadowy LLC. And when I traced the digital footprint, it looped back to Evelyn's brother-in-law. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood, she was robbing it and using fear as camouflage. And when you corner a white-collar predator, they don't get polite, they get dangerous. Late one Thursday, I stopped by the HOA office to grab old meeting minutes. The door was cracked, lights on. I walked in quietly, and there was Evelyn, hunched over the main server terminal. Hair messy, expensive blouse sticking to her back with sweat, fingers slamming the keyboard like she was trying to erase her own shadow. She was mass deleting years of ledgers, emails, wire transfer receipts. Destroying evidence. She spun around when she saw me, eyes wide with this pure animal panic. Started stammering about digital clutter, like she was doing me a favor. She didn't realize that the second I got elected, I'd initiated a silent cloud mirroring protocol. Everything she touched was being copied, time-stamped, logged. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I just gave her this small, pitying smile, and I walked out, called the district attorney, Valerie Carmichael, a woman with a reputation for putting arrogant officials behind bars, and she moved fast. FBI financial crimes got involved. Warrants got signed. Agents stormed the clubhouse at dawn and seized the drives. We didn't keep it quiet. We made it public, because secrecy is how people like Evelyn survive. At the next county commissioners' meeting, what's usually a sleepy bureaucratic snooze fest turned into the biggest event Lake Laner had ever seen. Auditorium packed. News cameras glaring. The air buzzing with the kind of anger that's been trapped for years and finally found a door. Evelyn strutted in anyway, flanked by a new defense attorney who looked like he hadn't slept in days, still wearing that same tight smile, still thinking she could control the story by calling me a vindictive, unstable divorcee. Then Valerie Carmichael stepped to the microphone, calm, steady, and announced a 42-count indictment. Wire fraud, racketeering, federal obstruction of justice. You could hear people inhale like the whole room just realized it wasn't crazy, it was real. But the real climax wasn't the charges, it was when the mic got handed to the community. Hank Gallagher stood up gripping his walker, voice trembling, staring right at Evelyn, talking about the nights he couldn't sleep because she threatened to take his home over flowers. The Alvarez family spoke about the harassment, the undertones, the way she made them feel like they didn't belong. Mrs. Lynn talked about her peaceful mornings ruined by fines and letters and fear. And you could see Evelyn shrinking, her facade cracking, her kingdom evaporating under the weight of people finally saying out loud what she'd done. When the officers escorted her out, nobody cheered. Nobody booed. It was just silence. The kind of silence that feels like judgment. That night, I drove back to my grandfather's place, the cabin now framed by new lumber and actual hope. I stepped onto my houseboat deck, the one she called a garbage barge, and listened to the water lap against the hull, soft and steady like a heartbeat. And that's when the lesson landed, not like a lecture, more like a bruise you finally notice. Communities are fragile, and the line between order and oppression is thinner than people think. Sometimes the people screaming the loudest about standards aren't protecting anything, they're hiding behind the rules, because rules look respectable when you're using them to control. And I realized something else too: losing everything didn't end me. It placed me exactly where I needed to be, right in the path of someone who'd been steamrolling people for years, thinking nobody would ever push back. Evelyn's doc got scheduled for removal. Her accounts got frozen. Her name went from president to defendant. And the neighborhood finally exhaled. Now here's the part one can't stop thinking about, and I want you to tell me what you think when someone uses authority to ruin lives under the banner of standards. Do they still deserve empathy when the consequences come crashing down, or is karma just the bill finally arriving with interest? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me if you think what happened to Evelyn was justice, revenge, or something in between, and if you've ever dealt with a petty tyrant, an HOA dictator, a power-tripping boss. Anybody like that, I want to hear your story too.